The conference room was cold, elegant, and ruthless. Laura Smith held the pen with a trembling hand as she signed the final divorce document. Across the table, Richard Lawson, her ex-husband, smiled smugly, his arm wrapped around his young new wife, Bianca Adams, who was absent-mindedly admiring the luxury watch on her wrist, as if this moment were just an insignificant detail. "It's finally over," Richard said with barely concealed disdain. "You've always been stuck in the past, Laura. You were never meant to win. The settlement was humiliating at $10,000, several months of rent, and the end of a lifetime built together." Bianca let out a low laugh, casting a calculated look of pity. Laura stood up without saying a word. As she left the building under the light rain of New York, she believed she had lost everything: dignity, future, hope. She had no idea that just a few minutes later, a single phone call would completely change the fate of everyone in that room. Laura Smith wandered aimlessly down Fifth Avenue, feeling the fine rain trickle down her face as if it were part of what remained inside her. The distant sound of cars, the reflection of lights on the wet buildings, everything felt muted and significant. Just moments ago, she had ended a 10-year marriage with a cold, definitive signature. Now she needed to figure out how to survive with the little she had left. It was then that her phone vibrated inside her bag. An unknown number. Laura almost ignored it. In recent months, strange calls meant only debt collections, empty promotions, or reminders of what she could no longer afford. "Still," she answered. "Ms. Laura Smith?" asked a deep, confident male voice, unhurried. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is August Farias. I am a senior partner at Farias and Whitmer Attorneys. We need to speak with you in person today." Laura stopped walking. The name of the firm was not unfamiliar to her. On the contrary, it was one of those firms mentioned in reports about large inheritances, billion-dollar disputes, and powerful families, people far removed from her world. "There must be some mistake," she replied cautiously. "I am an archivist." "Precisely, Ms. Smith. There is no mistake. This concerns the estate of Mr. Samuel Anderson." The name hit Laura like an ancient echo. Samuel Anderson, a distant relative, almost legendary within the family. Her grandmother's brother, rarely mentioned, always described as a reclusive man, extremely wealthy, who had cut ties with almost everyone. Laura vaguely remembered seeing him once as a child at a silent funeral. He had asked her what she liked to read. When she replied history, he had just looked at her seriously, as if he had stored that information away. "Miss Smith," the lawyer insisted, "Mr. Samuel passed away 3 days ago. The will requires your immediate presence. Our address is on Park Avenue. Can we receive you within an hour?" The call ended before Laura could ask more questions. She stood under the awning of a closed store, gripping the phone tightly. All of this seemed too absurd to be real, an administrative error, a cruel coincidence on the worst day of her life. But something inside her refused to ignore it. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was that silent instinct that had always guided her through dusty archives when a forgotten note changed the meaning of an entire research project. She took a taxi. During the ride, she watched New York pass by the window like a silent film. She thought of Richard, the confidence with which he had spoken about the future. She thought of Bianca, so certain that the world had already chosen winners and losers. And for the first time since the conference room, Laura felt something different from pain, a strange, almost electric tension. The office building loomed large, glass and steel reflecting the grey sky. Laura got out of the car, adjusting her simple coat, aware of the contrast between her discreet appearance and that environment of power. A receptionist awaited her name, unfazed, and led her directly to a private elevator. As it ascended, Laura felt her stomach tighten. Whatever the reason for this summons, one thing was clear. Her life was not just ending a chapter. Something much larger was about to be opened, though she had no idea of the price it would demand. The elevator rose in absolute silence, so smoothly that Laura Smith barely noticed the movement. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that felt more like a historic hall than a law office. Dark wood on the walls, carefully lit old paintings, and a wide view of Park Avenue stretching below, indifferent to the earthquake about to happen in her life. In the center of the room, standing next to a long, immaculate table, was the man from the call. August Farias appeared to be just over 60, with neatly trimmed grey hair and a firm gaze, accustomed to making decisions that changed destinies. "Ms. Smith, thank you for coming so quickly," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. "I know this hasn't been an easy day." Laura sat down cautiously. She felt out of place, as if she had intruded on a world that did not belong to her. "Doctor, I need to be honest. If this is some mistake, I prefer to clarify it now. I have no resources or connections to large inheritances." August opened a thick leather folder and placed several documents on the table, organizing them with almost ceremonial precision. "I understand your skepticism, but there is no mistake. Mr. Samuel Anderson left very clear instructions." The name echoed heavily again. Laura clenched her hands in her lap. "I barely knew him." "Even so, he knew you," August replied calmly. "More than you realize." He slid a document forward. Laura immediately recognized the official format of a will. Her heart raced. "Samuel Anderson passed away 3 days ago at the age of 98, peacefully. He had no children. His closest relatives received modest legacies, but the total control of his estate was left to you." August paused briefly. "It was left to you." Laura felt the air thicken. Total control of what? Exactly. The lawyer took a deep breath, like someone who had made that revelation only a few times in his life. From the Dawn Group, a private conglomerate operating in energy, logistics, technology, and infrastructure. A silent empire conservatively valued in the tens of billions of dollars. The word billions felt meaningless. It was too big, too distant. Laura placed her hand on the arm of the chair to steady herself. "This is impossible. I'm an archivist. Yesterday I was negotiating how to pay the rent." "That's exactly why he chose you," August said, with a firmness that allowed no debate. "Samuel believed that wealth without conscience destroys everything it touches. He had followed her journey from afar, her dedication to preserving history, her integrity, her refusal to trade values for convenience." August then pulled out a yellowed envelope. "This is a handwritten letter addressed to you." Laura opened the paper carefully. The handwriting was firm, old-fashioned. "You chose to protect what the world forgets. That requires courage. The power I leave is not a prize. It is a burden." The words seemed to pierce through her. That distant man, almost non-existent in her memory, had seen something in her that no one else had, least of all Richard. "There is a condition," August continued, breaking the silence. "To fully inherit, you must assume the presidency of the Dawn Group's board and hold the position for a full year. If you are removed or resign, everything will be allocated to an international historical preservation fund." Laura slowly lifted her eyes. Fear and something new mixed within her. "They will try to destroy me without a doubt," the lawyer replied. "But Samuel believed that you would know how to resist, not with brute force, but with memory, patience, and truth." Laura closed the letter. She thought of the boardroom, Richard's disdain, Bianca's restrained laughter. For the first time since the divorce, she didn't feel small. "When do I start?" she asked with a firm voice. August smiled for the first time. "Now, Mrs. Smith, the game has already begun." The silence that settled after August Farias's words was heavy, almost physical. Laura Smith felt the real impact of what she had just accepted. It was not just an unexpected inheritance. It was a battlefield. A whole year, she repeated to herself more than to the lawyer. A year surrounded by people who hate me before they even know me. August nodded slowly. Mr. Samuel did not believe in easy successions. For him, power needed to be tested. He was fully aware that the Dawn Group's board would not accept you without resistance. Laura leaned back in the chair. The image of the divorce was still vivid. Richard confident, Bianca sure that the world worked in favor of those already at the top. Now, Laura was about to enter that same world, but without protection, without clear allies. "Who will be against me?" she asked. The lawyer crossed his hands on the table. "Practically everyone. The board is made up of experienced executives, men who have spent decades accumulating influence. But the most dangerous of them is Edward Knight, the current CEO, Samuel's right-hand man for many years. He expected to inherit control. The name etched itself in Laura's mind. So he will see me as a mistake, as a threat, August corrected, and as an opportunity. If you appear weak, they will try to force you to resign. If you make a serious mistake, they will call for a vote of no confidence. All within the law. Laura took a deep breath. And if I fail? In that case, the entire empire will be dissolved and donated to an international fund. You will leave with nothing. August paused. Samuel called this the final test of character. Laura looked again at the folded letter on the table. It is not a prize. It is a burden. Now I understood the real weight of those words. They will try to provoke me, she said, with growing clarity. Test me, make me react out of fear. August watched intently. Exactly. They expect an insecure woman, someone who tries to mimic their vocabulary and speak. Mr. Samuel believed that you would do the opposite. Use what I know, Laura completed. Observe, listen, connect the past to the present. For the first time since entering that building, she felt fear transform into focus. August stood up and walked to the window. Tomorrow morning, an official statement will be released. Samuel's death and your appointment will become public. You will cease to be a private person. Your life will be scrutinized, distorted, questioned, including by my ex-husband, Laura said with a bitter half-smile. Especially by him, the lawyer confirmed. People like Richard Lawson can smell power. He will try to get close or attack you. Laura closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, there was something new in her gaze, silent determination. Then I can't make mistakes, she said firmly. No one expects perfection, August replied. But they expect hesitation. That is what cannot happen. He approached the table again and pushed a small device toward her. This is a secure phone. From now on, all important communications will go through here. Tonight, you will be taken to a safe location. Tomorrow, we will begin preparations for the first board meeting. Laura took the device. It was light, cold, real. When will this meeting be? In 5 days, August replied. 5 days to learn the rules of a game that many have spent their whole lives playing. Laura stood up. She felt the weight of responsibility, but also an unprecedented clarity. They think I'm just an archivist, she said calmly. Let them keep thinking that. August smiled discreetly. That's exactly why Samuel entrusted everything to you. As she walked out of the room, Laura understood that this year would not only decide her inheritance, it would decide who she truly was. The 5 days leading up to the first board meeting passed like a dense, silent blur. Laura Smith hardly slept. Her mornings were filled with intense sessions with lawyers, consultants, and specialists who poured in information. In the evening, alone in the temporary room, where she had been placed for security reasons, she did what she always did best: read. Not summarized reports, not prepared presentations. Laura delved into the historical files of the Dawn Group, old minutes, forgotten memos, internal correspondence revealing decisions, mistakes, and patterns. Gradually, the conglomerate ceased to be an abstract monster and began to have a narrative, a past, a logic. On the morning of the meeting, she wore a simple yet precise outfit. No ostentation. She wanted to appear as she was, and someone there to work, not to impress. Upon entering the boardroom at the top of the headquarters building, she felt the air change. Conversations ceased, gazes lifted, assessing her as if she were an object out of place. At the head of the table was Edward Knight, elegant, confident, with the calmness of someone who believed that seat belonged to him by right. He did not stand when Laura entered. "Miss Smith," he said with a smile that was too polite to be sincere. "Welcome. I imagine this environment is new for you." Laura responded with a slight nod and took her seat opposite him. "New environments require heightened attention," she said calmly. "That's how you learn quickly." Some board members exchanged discreet glances. Edward maintained his smile. "Before we begin," he continued, "I need to express the general concern. The Dawn Group faces complex challenges. It is not a historical file. It is a living organism that requires firm decisions and experience." It was the provocation that August had foreseen. Laura did not react immediately. She opened her folder calmly. "I completely agree, Mr. Knight. That's precisely why I propose we start with the first item on the agenda, the acquisition of Minera Questrel, presented by its board." Edward raised his eyebrows slightly, pleased. That was the project he dominated, a billion-dollar investment, technically complex, hard to question without deep financial knowledge. The presentation was long, filled with graphs and optimistic projections. Laura listened in silence, making few notes. When Edward finished, he leaned back in his chair. "As chair of the board, do you approve the advancement of the negotiation?" he asked with the confidence of someone who already expected the answer. Laura closed her folder. "I have a few questions before that." The slight discomfort was immediate. "In the documents from 12 years ago," she began, "there was a geological report indicating significant stability in the soil of the main region of Questrel. Has this risk been reassessed?" Edward blinked. "Those data are old," he replied, "and yet I found no conclusive study that completely invalidates them." She continued in a firm, measured voice. "Moreover, the company has been involved in recent political disputes with a history of temporary nationalization of foreign assets, a legal risk that I did not see reflected in the projections." Silence spread across the table. Laura then concluded, "Finally, I found a note from the founder recorded after analyzing this same acquisition years ago. His decision was clear. The risk was too high for the company's legacy." Edward lost his smile. For the first time, he seemed exposed. "In light of this," Laura said, "the proposal is denied. Let's move on to the next item." No one contested. At the end of the meeting, Laura felt her legs tremble as she stood up. She knew she had not won the war, but she had made something clear. She was not there by chance. As the board members left in silence, Edward remained seated, his hard gaze fixed on her. Laura held his gaze for just a second before leaving. The game had truly begun if she had just dealt the first blow. In the following days, the board meeting made it clear that Edward Knight would not accept defeat in silence. He did not confront Laura Smith directly again. On the contrary, he began to act overly cordial, publicly praising her historical insight while behind the scenes he moved pieces with surgical precision. Important reports began to arrive minutes before meetings. Documents came incomplete, filled with technical terms designed to confuse. It was not a frontal attack, it was a war of attrition, a game of patience. At the same time, the real war exploded outside the walls of the Dawn Group. On Tuesday morning, Laura woke up to her phone vibrating incessantly. August Farias got straight to the point. "It has begun." The headline spread too quickly to seem coincidental. "Unexpected heiress faces psychological pressure. Experts question the preparedness of the new president." In social columns, sources close to her spoke only of isolation, emotional fragility, and impulsive decisions. Laura did not need to read much to recognize the pattern. Richard Lawson and Bianca Adams appeared in a televised interview that same night. Sitting side by side, hands intertwined, they expressed rehearsed concern. "Laura has always been very sensitive," Richard said, his voice choked. "This whole responsibility might be too much for her." Bianca nodded with a calculated, sad smile. "We pray that she is okay. We just want to protect her from people who might take advantage." It was a cruel inversion. The man who had humiliated her now positioned himself as a savior, and it was working. The narrative gained strength. "They are building the path to question her legal capacity," August explained during a private meeting. "If they can convince public opinion, they will pressure the board." Laura listened in silence. When she spoke, her voice was firm. "Then we need the truth, not their version." She authorized something she had been avoiding since the beginning. "I want a complete investigation into Richard and Bianca. No shortcuts. I want to know where the money comes from, the connections, everything." August showed no surprise. "I've already initiated contacts." As the investigation progressed, Laura dealt with the growing solitude. People watched her all the time. Every gesture was interpreted, every silence distorted. At night, alone, she returned to the files, the only place where the world still made sense. It was there that she began to notice something unsettling. Certain recent strategic decisions always favored the same intermediaries. Ghost companies repeatedly appeared in contracts, a pattern that did not emerge by chance. A few days later, August returned with the preliminary report. "Richard is in debt," he said bluntly, "much more than he appears. There are indications, the use of insider information in financial operations. As for Bianca, that's not even her real name. There's a history of strategic relationships with influential men." Laura closed her eyes for a moment. "And what about Edward?" she asked. August took a deep breath. "There are regular transfers through a company registered abroad, not directly, but enough to establish a connection. Everything was falling into place. Richard wasn't just a desperate opportunist, he was a pawn, a useful instrument for someone bigger." "They want to push me into making a mistake," Laura said with cold clarity, "or force me to react emotionally." "Exactly," August confirmed. "The question is how to respond without playing their game." Laura stood up and walked to the window, observing the city pulse below, indifferent to the conspiracies in the high rises. "We won't react," she finally said. "We will expose." August raised, his eyebrows slightly. "Where?" Laura turned, her gaze determined. "In the only place they feel invincible, in public, in front of everyone." At that moment, she understood that Edward Knight had chosen the wrong battlefield, and Richard, once again, underestimated the woman he thought he had left behind. The night of the big event arrived, surrounded by lights, cameras, and carefully staged expectations. The main hall buzzed with power. Executives, politicians, celebrities and journalists circulated with glasses in hand, confident that nothing escaped the control of those at the top. Laura Smith entered quietly, not seeking attention. If she knew, she would have it. The dress was sober, elegant, distant from the excessive glitter that dominated the environment. There was something different about her posture, and it wasn't defiance or vanity, it was firmness. Across the hall, Edward Knight was conversing with investors, confident, laughing easily. Beside him, Richard Lawson and Bianca Adams greeted acquaintances like a victorious couple, enjoying the narrative they had constructed over the past few days. Go, from the concerned ex-husband, to the supportive new wife, to the fragile heiress about to lose control. As Laura approached, conversations gradually ceased. Silence spread like a wave. "Richard," Laura said, opening a rehearsed smile, "I'm glad you came. We were just talking about you, about how heavy all of this must be." She held his gaze for a second before responding. "I can imagine." Edward tilted his head. Theatrically. "Miss Smith, I'm relieved to see you here. I confess many were apprehensive." Laura nodded slowly. "I understand. That's why I thought it was important to clarify a few things here." Now some guests approached, drawn by the attention. A journalist recognized the scene and raised his phone. Edward realized too late. "In the past few weeks," Laura continued, in a calm voice, "I've been hearing versions about my health, my capabilities, my intentions, curious stories, especially when they always come from the same sources." Richard frowned. "Laura, this isn't the place." "On the contrary," she interrupted. "It's exactly the place." She made a discreet gesture. A large screen lit up in the background. The murmuring ceased completely. "Let's start with the money," Laura said. "Richard, do you remember claiming you only wanted what was best for me?" On the screen appeared financial records, dates, amounts, intermediary companies. "These transfers," she continued, "show regular payments made to you by a company linked to funds abroad. Funds, by the way, directly connected to internal decisions of the Dawn Group." Richard's face paled. "This is a mistake," he stammered. Laura then turned to Edward. "The same fund appears linked to projects you personally approved, projects that benefited your shell companies." A murmur ran through the hall. Edward maintained his composure, but his eyes betrayed urgency. "This is absurd," he said in tone. "A public accusation without evidence. We have all contracts, records, histories, including something simpler," Laura completed. She turned to Bianca. "Bianca, or rather Carla Mendes, as stated in your previous documents. Perhaps you'd like to explain why your pregnancy doesn't coincide with any of the disclosed dates." Bianca placed her hand on Richard's arm, trembling. The silence was absolute. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," Laura concluded. "I'm here to end lies. What they did to me, they did believing I wouldn't know how to react, that I would accept the role they gave me." She took a deep breath. "They underestimated the wrong person." Laura turned off the screen and stepped back. She didn't smile, didn't raise her voice, just left the truth hanging in the air, heavy, unavoidable. As security approached and whispers erupted around her, Laura moved forward, crossing the hall with the same calm she had entered with. That night marked not just a public exposure, it marked the end of a game she never chose to play, the beginning of something that no one there could control anymore. The days following the public event changed everything. Edward Knight was removed from his position after an inevitable internal investigation. Richard Lawson became a defendant in financial lawsuits he never imagined facing. Bianca disappeared from social columns as quickly as she had appeared. Laura Smith, on her part, did not celebrate. There were no victory shouts nor empty revenge. There was silence, a silence different from that of defeat. Now it was the silence of someone who survived. Months later, the Dawn Group began to show signs of transformation. Obscure projects were shut down. Investments began to follow ethical and long-term criteria. People who once mocked the archivist now listened to every word she said, not out of fear, but out of respect. On a quiet afternoon, alone in her office, Laura opened Samuel Anderson's letter again. For the first time, she smiled genuinely. She finally understood, and the inheritance was never just money. It was the confidence that an ordinary, honest, and prepared person can face corrupt systems if they prevail. She didn't become powerful by humiliating others. She became powerful because she remained whole when everything tried to break her. Valuable lessons of life and ethics sprouted. Pointer finger pointing to the right. Never underestimate the power of knowledge, patience, and dignity. Pointer finger pointing to the right. Kind people can be oppressed in silence, but the truth always. Find your voice. Index finger pointing to the right. True power does not lie in controlling others, but in not allowing ourselves to be manipulated. Laura proved that holding on to one's values from the past can become a weapon for building the future. The host said, "What do you think of Laura's journey? Have you ever been overlooked just for being kind or discreet?" Index finger pointing to the right. Share your opinion in the comments. We read them all. Red heart. If this story touched you, leave a like to support the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring stories. Remember, good people are never forgotten, and kindness is always rewarded.